Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to this call, and thank you for taking the time to listen and participate in tonight's webinar about the move from executive committees to becoming trustee boards. We hope the information we share tonight will be useful and enable you to begin planning within your groups and districts over the coming months. A few housekeeping items before we get started. So this session is being recorded, and we will share it on the Essex Scouts website in a few weeks' time for anyone to have a look back at, or for anyone who couldn't make it this evening. If you'd like to ask a question, please do so using the Q&A function on your screens, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those at the end of the evening in our Q&A slot as possible. We've got plenty of time at the end for that, and anything we're not sure of, we'll make sure we take it away and publish the answer after the event. So on to who's on the call this evening. So for those who've not met me before, my name's James Hopkins. I'm the Transformation Lead for Essex Scouts, responsible for leading everything that's coming over the next few years in terms of the changes to how we volunteer and other things that will be coming after that. I'd now like to invite my colleagues. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
You're on mute, Chris.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, my name's Chris. As it said, I'm the volunteer engagement member of the Transformation team, working very much with the DCs, GSLs, and specifically on stuff around trustees.
Thank you, Chris. And Tilly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tilly Stewart. I've joined the Transformation team, and I'm very new to Essex Scouts and Scouting as a whole. So I've joined helping with the technology and data analysis side of things.
Lovely, thank you both. So I'm going to hand over to Chris now, who's going to talk through the next few slides.
Thank you. Yeah, so the purpose of this evening is set out there on these slides, and we'll look a little bit more about all of this as we move forward. So while we're transforming the whole of the volunteering approach within Scouting, team-based, as it says, trustee boards, which is going to be a focus for us later on in this session, and then the next steps that we all need to take as trustee boards. And as James said earlier, we've got an opportunity for questions and answers. This whole piece is around the work that we're doing to transform the volunteering experience across the whole of Scouting. An executive committee is one of those areas that we're looking at this evening. Much of it is informed by, as it says there, the guidance from charity regulators, but also consistent with us moving towards being a team-based approach across the whole of the way that we work within groups, districts and counties. Some of it is going to take a bit of work for us to do around cultural and procedural changes, but it does all fit in with this Skills for Life strategy and the North Star, which again you'll hear a little bit more about as James moves on to some further slides in a little while. So we will all know that good governance is fundamental to what we do as a charity, and it ensures that we can comply with the law, as it says, and the regulations, and meet our own charity's objectives within Scouting. So there have been quite a few changes in recent years. We're not going to go through those this evening, but Scouting itself has not really kept up the speed with a number of these changes. I mean, some of the things that we do are quite old-fashioned and anachronistic, if I can say that word, in terms of how we run Scouting. So as I say, as we move forward, you'll be able to see how this is all going to work with us locally here in Essex. And I think I'm handing back to James now.
You are, thank you, Chris. So before we get into the details around the trustee board changes in terms of the specifics, we wanted to share a quick reminder of why we're transforming volunteering, as the context here is important to understand, and it links directly to trustee boards. So let's dive straight into that. So our Skills for Life strategy runs until 2025 and covers 6 programs of work. So people, program, perception, digital, early years, and equity, diversity, inclusion. And within that, our aims are to give more young people skills for life, ensure that our volunteers are feeling valued in the stuff they do, the great stuff they do within Scouts in Essex, and to adapt to the outside world, because things have significantly changed. We have moved on now from the pandemic, but that has changed a lot of the public's views on how and when they want to volunteer. And the next 12 months worth of changes are all ultimately around us wanting to make volunteering with Scouts easier and more fun, so that we attract more volunteers and our current volunteers want to stay. And by doing that, you'll hear a lot then about our North Star. So our goal is to give more young people skills for life. In Essex, focusing specifically on ourselves, we've got over 3,000 young people on waiting list now. That's actually gone up on the 2023 census, when we've got a great opportunity to make a real difference for young people in our communities and keep delivering great programs for our current members. So these changes are a part of that journey, including those around trustee boards, as we'll see as we progress. Now, for a little bit of context in designing these changes, a huge amount of research was undertaken across a broad spectrum of current volunteers, previous volunteers, and members of the public from a wide range of backgrounds. It was really important we didn't just talk to ourselves, and the external outreach has proven invaluable. And by that, we also mean, outside of parents of current young members, so we can really focus on bringing in fresh new volunteers from the public who are not involved in Scouting in any way, shape or form. So this research all helped inform the current transformation programme based on some of the following learnings. So we know that everyone loves to really deliver great programs for our young people, and our leaders take great pleasure from doing that. But we do have a number of challenges still within that. So we know that only 30% of potential volunteers want to give their time regularly, yet we still quite often talk about having to come every week, or if not, perhaps we give off that perception, and that can then put a barrier up for someone wanting to come into the movement. We also have a huge amount of administrative tasks, and some of our tools are not the best for making that as quick and as slick as possible. And some of our current processes and structures and training doesn't support easy recruitment, it actually puts them off. And I think the other key thing in terms of culture and how we can make ourselves more welcoming is the research showed that the main reason that current adult volunteers in Scouting leave the movement is because of how they are treated by other adult volunteers in the movement. And that really is something we have to change. We need that long-term culture change for the movement so we can continue to grow and continue to work towards our North Star. So in terms of culture, how are we going to do this? We need to, as we've said, change our culture, and everything we're introducing this year is around these aspects, ensuring we give our volunteers a warm and friendly welcome, treating each other with respect, with clear expectations on tasks to complete in our roles, and supporting our colleagues when things are not great or not clear. And over the next few months, we'll be sharing more around our volunteering culture and what that means for all of us. And as a reminder, hopefully lots of you will have seen or come to Essex Base Camp in December, or will have seen the material shared in Essex Plus or on the Essex Scouts website that talks about these in more detail. But we have primarily 3 key areas for change, which are providing a warmer welcome, so that induction process, how we bring people into the movement, delivering a more engaging learning experience, so moving from training to learning, so encouraging people to want to learn as opposed to you have to do this, you have to do that. Obviously an element of that does remain, but we need to again change that culture more to a learning focus. And finally, simplifying how we volunteer, so how we talk about ourselves, what our titles are, how we're structured, trying not to make our roles seem scary and overburdensome, which a number of the commissioner roles can come across that way. And all three of those areas will be supported by easy to use digital tools. So we know that Compass will be going, and that will be replaced with a new tool in February 2024 for us in Essex. And that, from what we've already seen, will reduce the administration around some of our key tasks quite significantly. But we don't stop there. After this first set of changes in the first year, we've got more to come, including things like the 14 to 24 review, which has already kicked off its research. We've got the rollout of squirrels and much more to come. So this is an ongoing piece. Now, specifically in terms of our executive committees and the current position we have here. So currently, executive committees is a mixture of governance and operational tasks. And quite often, if we're really honest with ourselves, some aspects of particularly risk and financial management, but perhaps others as well, are either not really clear about what expectations are for some of our executive committee members, or are not carried out particularly well or focused on, and it's something we need to work on. So some of these changes will build on that, as Chris will talk through later. And finally, another aspect is around we must have an adopted constitution. Nationally, that is on average around 51% have said in this year's census that they groups, district counties don't have or haven't adopted a constitution or don't know whether they have. In Essex, that was actually higher than the average at 61%. So we've got quite a lot of work to do there. And that's, again, something we'll be focusing on as we progress through this evening. Now, moving specifically into our team-based approach as we move forward, this comes under the banner of simplifying how we volunteer together. But what does that mean? And why is it pertinent to trustee board changes? So we do have a webinar dedicated specifically on this on the 17th of May 2023. We will be sharing registration details over the next few weeks for that with everybody, and we'll talk a lot more in detail about it then. But for now, a quick overview around the team-based approach. So this is moving away from roles and role descriptions to teams and team-based descriptions, where we break down tasks into manageable chunks that people can understand that they're coming to do, as opposed to here's a big scary role that has lots and lots and lots and actually makes it seem quite unattractive and puts people off. And those teams will be led by either a team leader or a lead volunteer. And it will see our structures change. So over the next few slides, you'll see some purely pictorial diagrams around how that will look in the future. So starting with a sectional group structure. So each group, if you look at the diagram on the right, will have a group leadership team, a set of sections and a trustee board. And that's obviously quite similar to how we work now. But like I say, the emphasis here is on having tasks and breaking them down and making sure they're allocated to individuals so we can share those around. They don't have to all sit with one particular role or one particular line manager. So it's just a change in emphasis about being a team and making that simpler to explain to new members or new potential volunteers. And similarly for districts and counties, we've got a not dissimilar structure here. You've got a trustee board and a leadership team, but we also have a volunteer and development team, which will focus on things like welcome, recruitment, learning. We'll then have a program team that will focus on supporting adults in sections to deliver great programs to our young people, because that is what we do. That is our most important thing. And finally, support, which is looking at all the behind the scenes stuff, whether that's admin, communications, campsites, that kind of stuff. As I say, we will talk through this in a lot more detail on the webinar in May. But for now, it's important to just show the context of where trustee boards sit and how that links to some of the other areas, which we'll explain over the next few slides. So for that, I'm going to hand back to Chris, who's going to talk through the specifics on what's changing for trustee boards.
Thank you, Jane. Right, so what's changing? Thank you. So you'll see there's three elements here to the trustee board changes: name, purpose, and membership, and these have all got a key focus on culture and culture change. And this is really to coincide with the move towards more of a team-based approach that James has just spoken about. And also, as I mentioned earlier, quite significant changes in charity commission regulations and good practice. Some of you will have heard from various things, maybe at base camp or some other meetings, that there were going to be some changes around trustee board membership, reducing the size of them, who sits on them, and so on. And that is correct, that is going to happen. But headquarters team have listened to the feedback that came through over the last couple of months and have decided that the changes will be split into two parts. So the first part is the name and purpose change, and the membership part of it will change within 2024, which is good news really, because personally I think it was going to be too much to do all in one go this year. But the feedback has been given, people have listened to it, and therefore we're going to split it into two parts. It means that we can have a bigger focus and the right focus on the cultural changes and how trustees act and operate. And let's get into that in a little bit more detail. So renaming as trustee boards. Sorry, I've moved forward too far. So what's changing? So I've already mentioned several times, I think, to bring us in line with good practice and charity regulators. There are two areas: a name. So executive committees will be renamed as trustee boards, and members will become trustees. And I think it's probably fair to say that in a number of areas, people already use this terminology quite regularly anyway. But what it does do is it means that we're all going to be using the same terminology for who we are as trustee boards and who we are as trustees. And the trustee board will have a clearer purpose statement to fit with a focus on governance, and we'll look at that a little bit more later. So the renaming of trustee boards, already mentioned, we're not going to be called executive committees. Already mentioned the good guidance and reinforce the purpose of the trustee boards. There's not really much more to add there on that one at the moment. And then moving on to the renaming as trustee boards. So it's going to be changing from mid-April. There'll be an update on POR, which will come out in the middle of the month. And the change happens upon the issue of the new release of POR. And it doesn't require any decision making or approval AGMs. It's something that will come into force with immediate effect, and we'll all have to try and get used to the new terminology, but it will take us a little while. So the POR change will, reference the trustee boards and trustees in all of its chapters. Compass is not going to be changing at this stage in terms of the role names. That will happen when we get a new membership system in 2024. But for the purposes of what we call ourselves, we'll be called trustees. For the purposes of Compass, it will still chart as executive members. But I don't think that's something we need to worry about at this stage, because we'll be looking at that next year. So already mentioned, trustees will have a clearer purpose statement, fit with a focus on governance. So the things that we talked about earlier, operational tasks, are really going to be managed through the group leadership team in the group context. But within a district and a county, we will have the support team structure in place. And we're already working on that at county level, and districts, we're working on that as we go through the next couple of months. It will all align with good practice and charity regulators. There's a lot of repetition in here, but I think it's quite important that we keep all of these things in mind as we're looking at these changes. So moving forward, on for more about the purpose of the trustee boards. So here, this shows you some of the typical examples of the elements of the trustee board purposes. And these are really some excerpts from the draft POO version that we've seen, which is going to be released in the next couple of weeks. Key changes here is around the wording from doing and deliver to being confident that and ensuring that. So it's about the trustee board not doing all these things, but making sure that the right things are in place. And it's also assuring yourself as a trustee that things are happening, policies are implemented and followed, rather than actually the trustees doing them themselves. Some other key points to highlight here. Having young people meaningfully involved in decision making at all levels. And I guess there's a question for all of us. How many of you have 18 to 25-year-olds on your committees? Is it a challenge you can take away to focus on over the coming months? It's worth looking at because, you know, we are a U-shaped movement. And there's a specific thing around developing and maintaining a risk register and how many of our groups and districts have one of those in place at the current time. It will be different for your type of group because it depends whether you've got premises, minibuses, all sorts of things. But these are things that the trustee board are going to be responsible for. So think about planning for those as we move into the 2023 AGM season. And moving further on, what's it going to look like in practice? Sorry, won't be a moment. Key thing to remember is that we're trying to make volunteering with the Scouts easier and more attractive for potential volunteers. So splitting these roles between governance and operational matters means you're not looking for somebody who can, you know, take on, you know, a large role necessarily with lots of responsibilities. We can be more targeted and focused, which could help us and should help us to recruit people, not just into trustee roles, but as you see further as we start looking at the team structure for individuals to do certain things rather than trying to do everything. And it's sharing out and reducing the workload. But hopefully we can attract more people by doing that. And it's not just about moving the deck chairs around. And we don't want, well, the ultimate aim is for people not just to carry on as you are, make the change and think critically about how this can make it easier to bring new volunteers in. Because the more volunteers we can get, the easier it is to share things out. So again, moving on. So already mentioned that POR will be changing in 2023. The key thing around the constitution, I've already mentioned that every group, district and county should have a constitution, and the numbers in Essex are quite low really, 39% of that they have a constitution of some kind, mostly a POR, some with some slight amendments. So those of you who have already adopted the constitution as set out in POR, the changes can happen really from the release of POR and doesn't need to be adopted or approved through the AGM. But if you haven't got a constitution, then you can informally adopt them and work towards from the release of POR and confirm it at the next AGM, which we'll talk about in a little while. So the release will look at the updated trustee board purpose statements within chapter 5. But just slightly going back to the constitution, it has been a requirement for AGMs to ratify a constitution since 2011, and message was repeated in POR in 2021. But I know we don't all read POR whenever the change is coming up. So you know, we're all forgiven for not necessarily knowing all the minute details, but nevertheless, going forward, we do need to make sure that every group, district and county has a constitution in place. It's quite important for the operation of the trustee board. So I'll move on now to the AGMs. Now, many groups, their year end is 31st of March, so they'll be having their AGM by the end of September this year. I do know that, well, and districts, but I do know there's obviously some groups and districts that have different year ends, and the timing of this might slightly change, particularly if your year end was 31st of December and maybe you've had your AGM already, in which case we'll be looking at this for early 2024. But for the majority, this surrounds the AGMs this year. So it lists there the things that need to be done. So I'm not going to read them all out. I think you can look at those for yourself. But this is a draft of what is going to be included in the POR change in coming out in the next couple of weeks. We don't anticipate that there should be significant change from this. But what we would say is that for all of this around executives, is please look at the changes to POR in detail, because it's going to affect every entity. So we do need to look at it. That's things like the key differences are agreeing quorums, adopting the constitution formally, not just saying we follow the POR constitution, but an actual decision and minuted outcome for that. But quite important that we do that. And there's more that we need to look at on the next slide. So again, making the appointments. Again, most of this will be familiar to most of you in terms of how we do things. But note that on the secretary role, you can have somebody who is not a trustee who carries out administrative tasks, which could include the minutes, etc. And there's quite a good reason for doing this, actually, because if you're a treasurer, you're focusing on taking notes, listening to what everybody's saying and making sure you're recording the decisions. You're probably not, in many cases, fully participating in the meeting or not able to because of constantly looking at what everybody's doing and writing down your notes. So, you know, you could, if you make those sorts of decisions at this stage, to have somebody who is not a trustee but is an administrator to take your minutes. Not saying you have to, but you certainly can do. Included within this is the appointment or reappointment of presidents at each AGM. And there's a reminder in here that districts nominating reps for the County Scout Council. We don't have the same thing at group level, appointing reps on the District Scout Council, but certainly for districts that is a requirement. So, in summary, they are an important first step to ensuring the effective governance by all trustee boards at all levels, and is a core part of the whole transition and transformation programme. And as I've mentioned, these two parts are for 2023, and next year we'll learn more about changes to how we appoint people to trustee boards and what that means. But we'll wait for that to come out later in the year and next year to advise on what the next steps are for that. And I'd now like to hand over to James.
Great, thank you for that, Chris. So in terms of next steps, let's focus on all that information that Chris has outlined there. So some of the key outcomes we're looking for here are to ensure that all trustee boards have adopted a constitution formally during this AGM season, that we begin using those purpose statements, and there are more than what we showed on screen, but that will come out in the April edition of POR. And that we're making sure that everything that should be covered on an agenda is, and that the proper governance is in place. And this is all part of making sure we're ready for that digital transition in February 2024 as well. So we need everyone to sort of get moving with that culture change of accepting that we're trustees and a trustee board and putting a bit more of a focus on that. And as Chris has said, we recognise that obviously not everybody has the same financial year end, so there will be some slight variations to that, but the vast majority of groups and districts should be able to achieve this during the AGM season by the end of September. So in terms of some actions here, just to sort of bring that all together, we need to look at a series of things. So every current executive committee will need to brief all their other trustees. So if everyone's on the call tonight, please take this away, share this information with the rest of your current executive committees. We need to be renaming ourselves, which is one of the simpler bits to do in terms of how we talk about ourselves and materials and invites and all that kind of thing. And begin using those new purposes. So when that full list comes out in POR, look at those, start working through the practicalities of that, what that really means for you in your group and your district. Lots of it will be familiar if you're if you swat up on POR quite regularly. Lots of the stuff in there is similar to what it is now, but there are some changes and some specific focuses, and that shift away from operational. The operational aspects sit in those new structures I showed earlier in the webinar. So for groups, that's in the group leadership team, and for districts and counties, that's in the support team. And I say we will cover that in more detail in May. This will take some time for everyone to get their heads around and to bed in and start thinking through these things. And critically there, something to really emphasise is we need to make sure that all trustees are recorded on Compass. So anyone who's nominated, elected, co-opted or ex officio, even section leaders who stand at the AGM to take their place on the current executive committee, they need to have that executive committee member role on Compass. And obviously with that, make sure that the training is completed and validated. This is important for a number of reasons. One, so that it ensures that trustees are fully aware of their responsibilities. Quite often, people will come on but not necessarily have the full brief and or the full understanding of what that means. Obviously, B, that Compass actually reflects your current structures, so that when we do transition the data from Compass to the new system next year, that it's accurate. And finally, we need to make sure that your actual structures are presented properly and that we've got everything in line. So it will take away some of the stress when we get through to the new system change and everyone's learning how to use the new system. All this stuff can be done. So the other thing to remember with that is if your group or district has their own charity number, so specifically as a registered charity, making sure that the charity commission is updated with your current trustees. It's something that's particularly important. We've looked at a few of them, and there's definitely some gaps there, so that's something to focus on too. So then in terms of the next AGM, obviously use that new AGM template when that comes out to make sure that everything is covered off, and then either adopt or re-adopt the model constitution set out in POR. And what we're going to be doing is keeping a central record for every group and district and the county as well, to track progress with this. So we need to be reporting back to headquarters and assuring ourselves that this is happening and that everyone has made this change. So we will need your support there in making sure that all executive committees as they stand today are briefed. District commissioners and group scout leaders, please make sure that you're sharing this with all of your chairs and trustees so that they're fully aware. Obviously we will do a lot of communication from the centre, but obviously some people's details are in transition or not up to date. So if everyone can be communicating and sharing this information, the better. So what we'll be looking for in terms of confirmation back is a copy of the agenda, which clearly shows the adoption of the constitution as an item on there, and with it a copy of the minutes after the meeting that records the constitution that has been adopted. And in terms of adopting the constitution, we've got some suggested actions around this just to try and help, because this stuff can be a little bit confusing and scary for some. So obviously make sure it's on the agenda when that's published in advance. We'd suggest that the adoption of the constitution is be really clear with everyone that it's on the presumption that it will be adopted and that it takes effect immediately. So just making sure that that's really clearly communicated to everybody present. If you're going to be adopting the model constitution in Scouting POR, the suggestion is to put that as a line in your minutes rather than copy and pasting the whole thing, because obviously as there are updates every now and then with the Charity Commission and parts of the POR constitution is updated. If you've copied and pasted a 2023 version, but it's slightly different in 2024 or 25 or onwards, you're going to have to re-adopt it every time. So save yourself that hassle and just put in a line about the model constitution scout PR has been adopted. Constitution. For some, it is appropriate to have a variation from that model. In terms of charity good practice, you'll need to document in those minutes what has been varied away from the scouting model and the reasons for deviating away. So please just don't do it on a whim. Obviously, some do have varied constitutions that are quite historic. With all of the charity regulation changes, we know that the model constitution, the scout POR, is up to date and in line with that. If you're not following that, obviously it's really important to make sure that any varied constitution does the same. And the last element to emphasise here is that every group or district must have a scouting trustee board of its own right. So if there's any situations where someone's sharing resources or maybe has like a joint management committee for a property, that kind of thing, that's absolutely fine. But the actual trustee board itself needs to be standalone and to focus on scouting matters. So that's just to really emphasise that. And then finally, there are some additional resources coming to support all of this. So there will be more material shared in early May, hopefully sooner, but we expect it around then. So template scripts, agendas, web pages on scouts.org.uk with more information, and some explanatory notes to just delve into the new purpose statements in more detail so that it's can be understood more clearly and quickly. So as soon as that's available, we will do another Essex Plus and a communication out to share that information so that everyone can peruse that at their own leisure and use the bits that are helpful or relevant to you. Okay, so that's it in terms of the presentation start. We are now going to turn to Q&As. So Tilly, what questions have we had in this evening, and where are we going to start first?
So we've had quite a few come in, which is fantastic. The first one is, what happens if we already have trustees?
So every executive committee should have committee members, effectively trustees already. So in that sense, there's the change here is around the purpose statements and how trustee boards function, as opposed to anything else. So it sounds like that if you're in that position, you're already well along the way, which is great.
Great. Okay, next one. Do the responsibilities of an exec committee member change with the change of name of the exec committee to trustee board?
Do I take that, Jones?
Yeah, go for it. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, nothing changes in terms of the responsibilities. It's just a name change from executive committee member to trustee. But everything else that we do as trustees, because we are all actually trustees of the charity, remains the same in terms of those responsibilities. However, of course, what we talked about is the fact that trustee boards will start to move away from lots of doing things that we talked about earlier, and moving more towards governance. So in essence, the role will ultimately change over a period of time as we embed the new structures and purposes, etc., into everything that we do. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Chris. Next one is, will an exec committee member become legally liable for anything when they transition to becoming a trustee? I'm concerned people will be frightened off with the consequential loss in volunteers.
We are, as trustees, I'm a trustee, we are all legally responsible for what our individual charities do. Whether our group or district is actually registered at the Charity Commission makes no difference, because we are all classed, each group, district, etc., is classed as a charitable entity, and each member of the executive, as far as the charity commission is concerned, is a trustee of the charity. So our responsibilities and liabilities do not change. From my perspective, one of the things that I've come across in the years of being a trustee trainer is that there are a lot of people who actually don't know what their responsibilities are because they've never been outlined to them. So using an example that the group does something and loses a lot of money, then trustees are ultimately liable. They are now, that doesn't change. But I think it's unfortunate that a lot of people don't know what their responsibilities are or potential liabilities. Because in a lot of cases, and I know because I've been a group scout leader, I've been a group chair, and sometimes it's quite convenient to ask parents on the night if there'll be parent representatives or somebody. You haven't got a treasurer, and you know somebody's got their arm up their back to be your treasurer for the and they agree to it on that night. But really, we're not doing them a good service by not actually letting them know what being a trustee is. And some of that is because the people asking themselves don't really know. And that's not a criticism. We don't know what we don't know. But yeah, so the responsibilities don't change by change of name.
Thanks, Chris. Next one we've got is struggling to see what the difference is between a well-run exec committee and a trustee board. We already do most of it, almost everything in your list of responsibilities.
I'll take that one. So that's brilliant if that's the case. Excellent, and thank you for running an excellent executive committee. Some of the key differences here, there are updated purpose statements. So you only saw a snippet on the screen. The full new purpose statements will come out with the April edition of POR. So there are some changes in there. The second is that the split we talked about when we're moving to this team-based volunteering approach. So operational aspects that currently sit under an executive committee, such as things like waiting lists, fundraising teams, hall management, that kind of stuff, moves away from the trustee board. So that will become part of the operational team. So in groups, that is part of the group leadership team. And for districts and counties, that's primarily part of the support team. And we'll work through those with you as we progress over the next 6 to 9 months leading up to Christmas to provide more advice and guidance on how that should be shaped and how that can work in your specific case.
Thanks, James. Next one I've got is, what would a president or VP do? Why would we need one?
You don't actually need a vice president or a president. Some groups have them, some districts have them. It might be somebody that you feel you would want them to have a role to represent your group or your district in other ways. But there's no requirement to have presidents or vice presidents. If you don't want one, you don't have to have one.
Great, thanks, Chris. What is meant by digital transition in 2024?
So this is the move to our new system. So Compass is going and will be replaced by a new system. For Essex, that shift happens in February 2024. So building up to that, we will be doing a series of training, guides, processes, how to do new things in the system, because it will be significantly different to how we do things now to reduce that administration burden. Now, for example, things like applying and renewing for permits, whether they're nights away or adventurous ones, will be in the new system. Nights away notifications will be in the new system, as well as lots of the stuff that we do now, and easy reporting and other things. So there's a lot for us to work on there. And what we want to do is ensure that we've got lots of these cultural changes done this year, so that we don't have this all going on at the same time as we're all trying to pick up a new system, because I'm sure we can all agree that that wouldn't be very sensible and cause a lot of stress for a lot of people. So we're trying to do this in a gradual way to try and spread the burden and make it easier for everyone.
Thanks, James. Next one we've got is, are Scouting going to send out new role descriptions for the various trustee member roles, which can be issued prior to the roles being adopted?
So there will be some new materials coming. Some of those we mentioned will be coming early May, and more as we progress throughout the year. But we will be, one thing I wanted to just pick up there in that question is that we're moving to teams and team descriptions, not role descriptions. So it's around what is the purpose of that team. So the trustee board in itself, as I said, trustees, is a team. So they will have a defined purpose, which is what we've talked about tonight. And within that are a series of tasks that need to be completed, which some can be done by more than one volunteer. Others might just be allocated to one specific person. It's breaking that down and moving away from these really long, big, scary role descriptions that if you put in front of a new member of the public will make them probably want to run away. Or they've not been fully explained to them, in which case they come in and then realise. So it's that shift. So we won't have role descriptions per se, but we will have team descriptions and tasks, and that will make it clear to new volunteers what their responsibilities are and what it is they're effectively signing up to. We'll go into that in more detail in the May webinar.
Thanks, James.
Can I just add in there that a tremendous resource that we have available that some people know about is that on scouts.org, you follow the link for info for volunteers, and then there's a link that says running scouts locally, and you find an awful lot around executives. Yes, some of that material is changing because of the changes that are coming forward, but I would encourage anybody who is a trustee or you're looking to bring somebody on as a trustee, because you don't need to log in to that part of it. The information is there, and there's so much that is available, and for many of us we don't really know what's there, and it's worth having a look and a little play around and just familiarizing yourself, particularly if there are any district or group chairs or any trustees out there. Go and have a look and see what's there. As I say, it is going to be changing, the material will be updated, but the fundamentals are not going to change in that regard. So there is the Charity Commission website as well, but that's a little bit more dense material, if I can use it that way. There's so much of it. We've got a lot, but Charity Commission's got a lot more. But I would urge people to go and have a look.
Thanks, Chris. The next one I've got is, would there be any additional training or revalidating training if the current members stay in the roles?
So if the current executive committee member is on campus, has done their training and it's validated, then no, there is no further training or revalidation needed. If there is someone who's not on campus or hasn't done their trustee training, then they need to be doing that. So, and it's really important that everyone who's a trustee does that, because it makes it really clear what their responsibilities are and what they should be doing and the questions they should be asking as part of those teams. So if everyone's done it, then no, but if they haven't, and when we are aware there is some gaps in certain places, so please do focus on that if that is the case.
Thanks, James. Next one I've got is there a timeline chart available showing what is going to be available and when?
Yep, absolutely. So last week in Essex Plus and now on the website under the transformation pages, there is a one-page summary on why we're transforming volunteering, including the 4 areas. On the bottom of that is a high-level timeline of all the changes, not just the trustee board elements. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. And also, as we progress, we'll be sharing more details and more specifics around that on each area of change.
Thanks, James. I've got penultimate one that I've got currently is, I may have missed this, is the POR Trustee Board Constitution already published and available to use?
The existing POR Constitution is on the website. It's via, if you follow the link through scouts.org to information for volunteers and running things locally, you'll also find, I think it's towards the bottom of the page, POR. And POR will contain the Constitution as it is but ultimately that will be updated once the material comes out in April. So by all means have a look, but bear in mind that there are going to be some changes and some nuances that you'll need to pick up on once it's published later in April.
Thanks, Chris. And the last question I've got for now is, it is unclear what the benefits of these changes are beyond semantics. Responsibilities have been stated as being unchanged unless a whole leadership team is recruited. Trustees continue to do what they have already been doing. What is changing to get all of these new volunteers and that we will now need?
So this is a good question. So as we started this webinar, we explained and outlined some of the broader context, because this shouldn't be viewed as one thing in isolation. So all of these collective changes, which there are other webinars coming on to give more detail and to keep building on what we shared at Essex Base Camp in December, is around making the volunteering experience and how we bring people into the movement easier, more relatable to the public. You know, we all largely, not in all cases, but largely know what role titles mean, what certain things do, but we're not 100% clear. We can guess and assume, but we don't know for sure. So we need to break down those perception barriers so that we're not already putting in a mental effort barrier for people to join the movement. You know, if you say, oh, come and be this, and it's not really clear what it is unless you can give a 15-minute spiel, then it's not clear. So with trustee boards and the changes around splitting governance and operational, what we're doing is actually making the skill sets of new volunteers we're looking for trustee boards to be focused purely on trusteeship and governance, and the operational aspects, which is largely a different skill set in a lot of cases, and time commitment and those kinds of things, into the operational side of the new teams, the teams-based approach. So rather than looking for someone who's a jack of all trades, we can then actually split that out and recruit people with specific specialisms for a specific few tasks or task that can actually be a more manageable chunk in terms of time, rather than some of these gargantuan roles that we do have. And we all know it. We know we have line managers and section leaders and group scout leaders that have too much on their plates. And whilst in some areas there is already some really good practice around team-based volunteering, there's lots where that isn't the case, or people feel like they can't share stuff out with others. And we need to change that culture. So that is the purpose of this. It's not just semantics. It is making a fundamental change to how we volunteer and how we talk about ourselves and how we structure ourselves and look after each other, really, as well. So quite a long answer there, but like I say, please don't look at this as just a trustee board change. There are other things to fit as part of a bigger picture, and we'll go through that in more detail over the coming months to build on what we've already shared.
Can I just come in there as well? The transformation program itself is not going to generate new volunteers today or tomorrow. But I think, as James has explained, it's kind of resetting ourselves in scouting through all this feedback from lots of different people over a period of time. Then we've got a different base to work from to look at people, new volunteers in the future. So none of us around the table think that this is going to bring us new volunteers today. It's a longer term program designed to give us those tools down the line. So some of the things, you know, might look as though it's moving the deck chairs. It might look as though it's, but this overall picture that James mentioned, we need to try and keep that in mind. Now, for some people on the call tonight, you're at different stages of knowing where we are and what we're doing. And that's simply because some people will have been to base camp, people that are working at county level will have done some things already. Districts are starting, groups later in the year, more information. So it will, as things progress, it will become a lot clearer. With regard to trustees, many of you will be trustees of other organisations, and the scouting method has evolved over, well, I suppose we could say over 100 years. And we have a way in which we recruit people to trustee boards or executive committees as we know them today. We have various categories of people who can become trustees, and next year we'll find out more about membership. But it's not consistent with how virtually all other charities work. So this is a piece of work that is designed to position us as charities in terms of the governance of what we do, more in line with Charity Commission and lots of other charities around the country. And I think the final point I'd like to make there is, if there is a person who sits on a trustee board at the moment that loves getting their hands dirty, painting the hall, doing the gardening, doing these things, as an individual, there is nothing to stop you carry on doing exactly what you enjoy doing. And if you like, that part of what you do, painting the hall or managing the gardens or whatever it happens to be, falls under the jurisdiction of the group scout leader or district commissioner, as it were. But your governing body, your trustee duties fall as part of the trustee board. Now that might seem a little bit strange, but it's trying to separate those activities from one part to the other, and for the trustee board to look more like other charities up and down the country.
Thanks, Chris. I have one final question that's come through. It said, it's a good way to round this sort of portion off. It says, will this presentation be sent out, and if so, when?
Absolutely. So we have recorded this session, so we hope to get that up onto the county website within a couple of weeks' time, so that you can then watch it at your leisure, share it with those who couldn't make it tonight, or play it at your next executive committee meeting, perhaps. Then you can listen to me all over again for the next hour. But it will be there for you to use as a resource, because we need to make sure that everyone is aware of this as much as possible. And we will be following it up with further comms when that's posted, and also in May when there's new resources available. Keep an eye out for the POR launch, which is scheduled for week commencing the 10th of April. Lots and lots of information to come there. And I guess with that being the last question, in terms of summing up, if you do have any further questions or thoughts after tonight's webinar that you go, oh, I wish I'd asked that, drop us an email at transformation@essexscouts.org.uk, or if you can't remember the email address, on the website, the Essex Scouts website, that is, there is a ask us a question function on the Transformation pages, so you can put one in there at any time, and we'll be happy to try and help. And if there isn't anything that we don't know the answer to, we will take it away and find that answer. So that just leaves me to say thank you again for all coming tonight. I hope you found that useful, and it gives you a flavour of things that you need to start planning and preparing for during this AGM season, and a series of actions to be getting started with. So thank you very much. Take care, and we'll see you all again soon.